My husband abandoned me the day before our adoption was finalized. Now he's back and begging to be my family again. Brian and I had spent 2 years in the adoption process after finding out I couldn't have biological children. We'd finally been matched with a beautiful baby girl, and we were supposed to bring her home the next day. Then Brian sat me down and said he'd been lying to himself about being okay with adoption. "I need biological children, and I can't pretend anymore," he said while Sophia's picture sat on our coffee table. "I need to have real children, and you can't give me that." He said he'd already filed for divorce. I sobbed and begged until I lost my voice, but nothing would change his mind. The adoption agency called the next morning saying they couldn't place Sophia with a single mother when she was specifically matched with a stable 2-parent home. I lost my husband and my daughter in 24 hours. After the worst 6 months of my life, I found myself sitting in a different adoption agency filling out paperwork to become a single mother, while the caseworker asked if I was absolutely sure I wanted to do this alone. I told her I'd never been more sure of anything. She showed me profiles of kids in foster care who needed homes, and I stopped at a photo of a 7-year-old girl named Alina, whose bio said she liked painting and reading, but had trust issues from being bounced between 5 different homes. Something about her eyes looked exactly how I felt when Brian walked out, and I knew immediately she was meant to be my daughter. The first time I met Alina, she was sitting in the foster home's living room pretending to read while actually studying me, to figure out if I was going to be just another person who disappointed her. She asked point blank why I wanted to adopt an older kid when everyone wanted babies, and I told her the truth. "So we're both rejects," she said, testing me to see if I'd get offended. "Exactly, which means we understand each other," I replied, and saw her smile for the first time. 3 months later, I was officially her mother, and we spent our first night eating ice cream for dinner, while she painted my nails and told me about all the houses that never felt like home. Within a year, she was calling me mom without me asking while I helped her with homework and braided her hair for dance recitals. We had inside jokes and Saturday morning pancake traditions and everything I thought I'd lost forever. She still had nightmares sometimes, and there were days when she tested every boundary to see if I'd send her back, but her therapist said she'd never seen a kid bounce back so fast. I wanted to tell her it was because we were healing each other, but that sounded too cheesy even if it was true. Then Brian showed up at Alina's school play where she was playing the lead role, and I nearly dropped my phone because how the hell did he even know about this? He was standing in the back of the auditorium looking like absolute hell with wrinkled clothes and greasy hair, while I spent the entire performance trying to figure out if I was hallucinating from stress. After Alina's standing ovation, he cornered me in the lobby while she was taking pictures with her friends, and I immediately asked how he found us. "Your sister felt bad for me and told me about the play," he said with bloodshot eyes that kept darting to where Alina was laughing with her theater friends. "She said you have this whole beautiful life now with your daughter while I'm 43 living in a 1-bedroom apartment eating cereal for dinner, because I can't even cook pasta without burning it." The whiskey on his breath at 2 in the afternoon made me step back, but he kept talking about how he'd tried dating, but every woman ran when he told them he abandoned his wife during an adoption. The ones who stayed only wanted my money, which is mostly gone now from spending everything on fertility treatments with my ex-girlfriend who dumped me when they didn't work, he said, laughing bitterly. "I made the biggest mistake of my life leaving you. I'm so alone that I talk to Uber drivers just to hear another human voice, and I realize now that I had everything and threw it away for some fantasy that doesn't exist." Alina appeared beside me still in her costume and immediately stepped between us with protective fury in her eyes. "Mom, is this creep bothering you?" she asked loud enough for the security guard to start walking over. Brian's face crumbled when he heard her call me mom, and he started sobbing right there in the middle of the lobby. "That should have been our daughter calling you mom, but I ruined everything because I'm a pathetic coward who couldn't handle not having biological children." I told him he was right about being pathetic but wrong about Alina, because she was always meant to be mine, and we found each other without him. "Please, I'll do anything to fix this," he begged, getting on his actual knees while everyone filmed with their phones. The security guard reached for Brian's shoulder, but he grabbed my ankle desperately and said the words that made my blood run cold. "I've been watching you both for months, and I know your routines, and I'm not going away until you let me be part of this family, because I have nothing left to lose." Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. The security guard yanked Brian's hand off my ankle and pulled him to his feet, while 2 other parents stepped between us, creating a human shield. My hands shook as I grabbed Alina's arm and we pushed through the crowd toward the exit doors. Brian was yelling something behind us, but I couldn't hear it over the blood pounding in my ears. Parents were pulling their kids away from the scene, and several had their phones out recording everything. My legs felt like jelly, and I had to lean against the wall for a second before we made it outside. The parking lot was bright with afternoon sun, and I fumbled with my keys trying to unlock the car. Alina climbed into the back seat without saying anything, and I locked the doors immediately. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 while pacing next to the car. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and I tried to explain what happened, but my words came out jumbled. She told me to slow down and take a breath. I explained that my ex-husband had been stalking us and just grabbed me at my daughter's school. She said officers were already on their way because 3 other parents had called about the incident. I could see Brian through the glass doors still arguing with the security guard who had him backed against the wall. More parents were leaving with their kids and giving us worried looks as they passed. Within 10 minutes, 2 police cars pulled into the parking lot and officers went straight inside. Another car arrived and a man in a dark suit got out carrying a notebook. He walked over to me and introduced himself as Detective Joshua Guthrie. He asked if I was okay and if Alina needed medical attention. I shook my head and explained what happened from the beginning. He wrote everything down and asked specific questions about Brian's exact words and actions. Another officer was inside talking to parents who saw everything. Detective Guthrie explained that what Brian did was assault, and his admission about watching us for months was criminal stalking. He said they had enough witnesses and video evidence to arrest Brian immediately. I watched through the car window as they brought Brian out in handcuffs and put him in the police car. His face was red and he kept trying to look at us, but the officer pushed his head down. Detective Guthrie gave me his card and said he'd need a full statement at the station, but we could go home first. He recommended I contact a family law attorney immediately about getting a restraining order. The drive home took forever because I kept checking the mirrors to make sure no one was following us. Alina stayed quiet in the back seat playing with the hem of her costume. When we got to our apartment, I checked every room even though I knew Brian was in custody. That night after Alina finally fell asleep, I went online and ordered a doorbell camera with overnight shipping. I installed the app on my phone and set up motion alerts. Then I went through the apartment checking every window lock and putting chairs under the doorknobs. Every car that drove by made me jump and check the window. I couldn't sit still and kept walking from room to room making sure everything was secure. Around midnight, I finally tried to sleep but kept getting up to check on Alina and look out the windows. The next morning, I called the number Detective Guthrie had given me for Sienna Webster. Her assistant said she could see me that afternoon for an emergency consultation. I dropped Alina at the school and explained to the office staff what happened. They said they'd keep her inside during recess and make sure no one picked her up except me. At the attorney's office, Sienna listened to my story and looked at the police report Detective Guthrie had already sent over. She said we needed to file for an immediate restraining order based on Brian's threats and the physical assault. She explained the process would take a few weeks, but we could get a temporary order within days. She helped me write out a declaration describing everything that happened, including Brian's admission about stalking us. That evening, I sat down with Alina at the kitchen table. I explained that Brian was someone from my past who was confused and that the police were making sure he stayed away from us. She listened without interrupting, then asked if we needed to pack go bags like she used to in foster care. My heart broke hearing her say that, but I told her we were safe in our home. She nodded, but I could see she didn't fully believe me. The next day, River Kavanaugh called me personally. He said he'd heard about the incident and wanted to discuss new safety measures at the school. They were implementing a pickup password that only I would know, and Alina would wait in the office until I arrived. He assured me Brian's photo had been distributed to all staff and security, with strict orders not to let him on the school property. He said they took these situations very seriously and would do everything to keep Alina safe. After I hung up, I finally called my sister. She answered on the first ring, already crying and apologizing. I cut her off and told her that her feeling sorry for Brian could have gotten us hurt, or worse. She tried to explain that he seemed so sad and lost, but I didn't want to hear it. I told her she'd violated my trust by giving him information about our lives, and I couldn't forgive that right now. She sobbed harder, but I hung up. 2 days later, Anastasia Schaefer called and said she had an opening for an emergency session. Alina and I went together, and she had Alina draw while we talked. Alina drew pictures of our apartment with thick black walls all around it. Then she drew us inside with more walls between us and the door. Anastasia explained that Alina was processing the trauma and trying to create safety in her drawings. She helped me understand how to support Alina without letting my own fear make things worse. She said kids pick up on adult anxiety, and I needed to project calm even when I didn't feel it. The next week, Sienna called and said it was time to file the official restraining order paperwork. We went to her office and spent 3 hours going through every detail. She'd gotten the videos from parents who filmed the incident and made screenshots showing Brian on his knees grabbing my ankle. She included those with our filing along with my declaration and the police report. She said the evidence was strong and judges took stalking cases involving children very seriously. That night, I found Alina sitting on her bed with every single light in her room turned on, including the desk lamp and the night light she hadn't used in months. She was pretending to read but kept looking at the door every few seconds, and when I asked if she was okay, she just shrugged and said she wasn't tired. I sat next to her and rubbed her back while she finally admitted she was scared Brian would come to our apartment, even though I'd told her the police were handling everything. The next morning, she asked if she could stay home from the school, and I could see her testing me to figure out if I'd actually keep her safe, or if I'd make her go anyway like other adults probably had before. I let her stay home that day, and we watched movies on the couch while she kept her backpack next to her the whole time, like she was ready to run if she needed to. I explained that we couldn't let fear control our lives, and tomorrow she'd need to go back to the school, but today was okay for a mental health day. She nodded and curled up against me, but I noticed she kept checking that the door was locked every time she went to the bathroom. 3 days later, I got to work and found red roses tucked under my windshield wiper with no note, but I recognized Brian's handwriting on the small envelope immediately. My hands shook as I took pictures of everything from different angles before carefully putting the flowers in a plastic bag I had in my car. I called Detective Guthrie right away, and he said to bring everything to the station so they could document it as evidence of continued contact after being told to stay away. The detective took my statement and photographed everything, but explained that without the restraining order being served, yet they couldn't arrest Brian for leaving flowers, even though we both knew it was intimidation. 2 days after that, Sienna called saying the judge had reviewed our filing and granted a temporary restraining order that would be in effect immediately. She said we had a hearing date in 3 weeks for the permanent order, and I needed to be prepared to testify about everything that had happened. I felt relief washing over me, but she warned that the order was just paper until Brian actually got served with it and knew he was legally required to stay away. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed with texts from my sister saying how sorry she was and how guilty she felt about telling Brian where we were. She went on and on about her own feelings and how bad she felt, but never once asked if we were okay or acknowledged the actual danger she'd put us in. I didn't respond, but took screenshots of everything, including the part where she admitted she'd given Brian our location and information about the school play. Later that evening, I was scrolling through social media when I noticed several new follow requests from accounts with no profile pictures and weird usernames. When I clicked on them, I saw they'd all been created within the last week, and the only activity was liking old photos of Alina and me from months ago. One account had liked a picture from Alina's birthday party, and another had liked every single photo from our summer vacation. I documented everything with screenshots before making all my accounts private and blocking every suspicious profile, but I knew Brian would just make more fake accounts. The next morning, Detective Guthrie called me back and explained that until Brian was officially served with the restraining order, they could only document his violations but couldn't actually arrest him. He said it was frustrating for everyone, but the law had specific requirements, and stalking cases often had to build up evidence over time before real action could be taken. I wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all, but instead I thanked him and focused on keeping detailed records of everything. A few days later, Alina's teacher emailed me with concerns about changes in her behavior at the school. She said Alina was keeping her backpack fully packed at her desk, instead of using her cubby, and wouldn't participate in group activities anymore. The teacher noticed Alina watching the door constantly and asked if everything was okay at home. I called the school and explained the situation without going into too much detail, and we worked out a plan where Alina could keep her backpack with her if it made her feel safer. That Thursday at 2 in the morning, I woke up to a notification from our doorbell camera, and when I checked the app, my blood ran cold. The footage showed Brian's car driving slowly past our apartment building, and in the clearest frame you could see him looking directly at our windows. His license plate was visible, and the timestamp showed he'd driven by 3 times in 10 minutes. I saved the video immediately and uploaded it to the cloud before sending it to both Sienna and Detective Guthrie with a message about this latest violation. The next week, Sienna had me come to her office to prepare for the restraining order hearing, and explained that Brian would probably have an attorney trying to minimize his behavior. She coached me on staying calm and sticking to facts when I testified, instead of getting emotional, even though the whole situation made me want to cry and scream at the same time. She said judges responded better to clear evidence than emotional pleas, and we had plenty of evidence thanks to my documentation. That same day, my phone rang from an unknown number, and when I didn't answer, it immediately rang again from a different number. The voicemail started piling up with Brian's voice alternating between crying and apologizing in one message, then angry and blaming me for ruining his life in the next. One message said I was being cruel for keeping him away from the family he deserved, and another said he was sorry for everything and just wanted to talk. I didn't listen to most of them all the way through, but saved every single one and spent an hour transcribing the important parts for our evidence file. The next morning, River called me into his office before school started and showed me the new pickup system they'd put in place where Alina would wait in the main office instead of the regular pickup area until I walked inside to get her. She wasn't happy about being different from the other kids when I explained it to her that afternoon, and kept asking why she couldn't just wait outside like everyone else, but I told her it was just for a few weeks until things got sorted out. My sister texted me that night saying she wanted to help fix what she'd done and offered to write a statement for the court about Brian's drinking and how bad he looked when she'd talked to him. I forwarded the text to Sienna, who said it could help our case, so I texted back one word, yes, and didn't respond to any of her follow-up messages asking if we could talk. 2 days later, my work email dinged with a message from Brian's personal account, and the subject line alone made my stomach turn because it just said, Sophia, over and over like he'd typed it 20 times. The email was pages long, rambling about how Sophia should have been our baby, and how he'd looked her up online and found out she'd been adopted by another couple who posted photos of her first birthday party on Facebook. He wrote about how those people stole our life, and how Alina was nice, but she wasn't really ours the way Sophia would have been because we didn't get her as a baby. I forwarded it to Sienna and Detective Guthrie without reading past the first few paragraphs because it made me want to throw up. That Thursday during Alina's therapy session, she looked at Anastasia, then at me, and asked in this small voice if Brian could take her away from me and make her go back to foster care. I pulled her into my lap right there on the couch and told her that our adoption was final and legal, and no one could ever break it while my heart pounded, because what if Brian tried something crazy with the courts? Anastasia helped explain how adoption worked, and that Brian had no legal rights to her, but I could see Alina wasn't totally convinced and kept holding my hand tighter than usual. Friday afternoon, Detective Guthrie called to tell me they'd finally served Brian with the temporary restraining order at his apartment complex that morning. He said Brian had answered the door drunk at 11 in the morning and started crying when he saw the papers but took them without a fight. The detective warned me that people often got worse after being served because now it was real and official, and Brian might try to reach out more desperately. That weekend, Alina woke up screaming at 2 in the morning for the first time in months, sobbing that someone was taking her away and she couldn't find me. I held her while she shook and we went to the kitchen to make hot chocolate even though it was the middle of the night. She sat on the counter while I heated the milk and I reminded her about all the people keeping us safe, including the police and the lawyers and the school. We stayed up watching cartoons until she fell asleep against my shoulder, and I carried her back to bed wondering how long the nightmares would last this time. Monday morning, Sienna called to tell me Brian had hired an attorney named Constantine Pugh, who'd reached out about negotiating terms for the restraining order. She said Constantine wanted to work out an agreement where Brian could send letters or have supervised phone calls, but Sienna told him absolutely not, and we wanted the full order with maximum protection. Constantine apparently said his client was going through a mental health crisis and needed closure, but Sienna shut that down, saying stalking and assault weren't symptoms that deserved sympathy. I had to call Alina's adoption caseworker that afternoon to report the whole situation, because it was required whenever there was any legal issue or safety concern. The caseworker listened to everything and took notes, then assured me this wouldn't affect Alina's adoption status at all, since Brian had no legal connection to her. She said she'd document everything in Alina's file and offered to write a letter for court, supporting our need for protection if that would help. Wednesday morning, Anastasia called me at work to say Brian had shown up at her office building and was standing on the sidewalk when security asked him to leave. He didn't try to come inside or violate the restraining order distance requirements, but stood there staring at the building for 20 minutes before walking away. She'd already called building security to alert them, and wanted me to know right away in case he tried showing up other places. That afternoon, my phone started buzzing with texts and emails from parents who'd been at the school play, offering to write witness statements about what they'd seen. One mom sent me the video she'd taken where you could clearly see Brian on his knees grabbing my ankle, while Alina stood between us looking ready to fight. Another parent wrote that she'd heard everything Brian said about watching us for months, and would testify to that in court. Their support helped because Brian's voicemails had been making me doubt myself with all his talk about just wanting to apologize and how I was being cruel by keeping him away. Having other people confirm that what happened was scary and wrong made me feel less crazy for being afraid of him. Thursday afternoon, I sat Alina down at the kitchen table with a notebook and started going through our safety plan step by step. She wrote my phone number down 5 times until she could recite it backwards and forwards, while I quizzed her on which teachers she could trust if something happened at the school. We practiced what she'd do if Brian showed up at recess, and she repeated back that she'd run straight to the office without stopping to talk to him. She drew a map of our apartment building showing all the exits and marked which neighbors we could knock on for help. Her small hands gripped the pencil so tight her knuckles went white, but she kept drawing and labeling everything carefully. The next morning, River called me at work to say Brian was sitting in his car just past the school property line watching kids arrive for drop-off. Security approached him, but he pointed out he wasn't technically on the school grounds, so they called the police while keeping an eye on him. By the time the cops showed up, Brian had already driven away, but River said he'd been there for 40 minutes taking pictures with his phone. I left work early to pick up Alina and found her waiting in the office with her backpack already on like she was ready to run. Detective Guthrie met me at the apartment that evening with a folder of suggestions about changing our daily patterns, since Brian clearly knew when we left for school and work. He showed me different routes I could take and recommended leaving at different times each day, even if it meant getting up earlier. I started setting my alarm for random times between 5 and 6:30 and taking 3 different ways to drop Alina at the school. Some mornings we'd leave 20 minutes early and get breakfast at a diner, while other days we'd rush out at the last second. The constant changes wore me out, but every time I thought about stopping, I remembered Brian sitting outside the school with his camera. My sister sent a check for $5,000 with a note saying it was for whatever security stuff we needed, and that she was sorry for everything. I deposited it without calling her, and spent it on new deadbolts for every door plus motion sensor lights for the hallway, and a better camera system that recorded to the cloud. The locksmith installed everything in one afternoon while Alina watched him work, and asked questions about how the locks couldn't be picked. Her teacher started letting her come in through the staff parking lot door in the mornings, so she didn't have to walk through the main entrance where parents gathered. The janitor would unlock it specially for us, and walk her to class while I watched from my car to make sure she got inside safely. Other kids asked why she got special treatment, but Alina just shrugged and said it was grown-up stuff they didn't need to worry about. Saturday night, I was watching a movie on my laptop when the screen suddenly changed to show Brian's face as the profile picture on my streaming account. The profile name had been changed to, "I'm so sorry, please forgive me," and when I checked the other profiles, they all had messages like, "I miss you," and "We belong together," as the names. My hands shook as I changed every password on every account I had and turned on 2-factor authentication for everything, even though it meant getting texts constantly. I spent the whole night going through my email to find any account I might have forgotten about and changing those passwords too. 3 weeks later, Sienna called to say our restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 9 in the morning. She came to my apartment Sunday afternoon with a binder full of evidence, and we spent 4 hours going through everything I'd need to say in court. She had me practice describing the school incident over and over until I could tell it without crying or getting too angry to speak clearly. Tuesday morning, I put on my most professional outfit and drove to the courthouse with my stomach churning, so bad I thought I might throw up. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood paneling and uncomfortable benches that made my back hurt within minutes. Brian sat at a table with Constantine, looking like he'd lost 20 pounds since the school play, and his suit hung loose on his shoulders. When the judge called me to testify, I walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like jelly, and raised my right hand to swear I'd tell the truth. Sienna stood at her table and guided me through questions about every single thing Brian had done, from showing up at the play to hacking my accounts. My voice cracked when I described him grabbing my ankle, but I kept going through the list of violations and threats. The judge took notes while I talked, and sometimes asked me to repeat dates or clarify details about specific incidents. After an hour of testimony, my throat was dry and my hands were cramped from gripping the edge of the witness box so hard. My sister took the stand next, and I could see her hands shaking as she described Brian showing up drunk at her apartment, begging for information about us. She told the judge about his drinking getting worse, and how he'd talk for hours about getting our family back no matter what it took. Her voice got stronger as she testified about feeling guilty for telling him about the play, and seeing how that one mistake had put us in danger. Constantine stood up for his turn and tried to make Brian sound like a sad man who just wanted to apologize for past mistakes. He talked about Brian's depression and loneliness, but the judge cut him off to point out that mental health problems didn't excuse stalking and assault. Constantine tried again, saying Brian never meant any real harm, but the judge pulled up the photos of Brian's hand wrapped around my ankle at the school. The evidence was right there in full color, showing Brian on his knees grabbing me while my daughter stood between us looking terrified. The judge looked at Brian and asked if he had anything to say, but Brian just stared at the table and shook his head. After 20 minutes of reviewing everything, the judge granted a 3-year restraining order with strict provisions that Brian had to stay 500 feet away from our home, my work, and Alina's school. He also ordered Brian to complete alcohol counseling within 60 days and to surrender any firearms to the police within 48 hours. The bailiff opened the heavy wooden door and I walked out into the hallway clutching the restraining order papers. So tight they crinkled in my hands while Sienna packed her briefcase and told me this was a solid win that would keep us safe for 3 years. My legs felt wobbly walking down the courthouse steps, but the fresh air hit my face, and for the first time in weeks I could breathe without that tight feeling in my chest. Alina was waiting at her after-school program, and when I picked her up, I showed her the official court stamp on the papers and explained that Brian had to stay away, or the police would arrest him immediately. That night, we ordered 2 large pizzas with extra cheese and put on her favorite movie about the girl who saves her village, while we built a blanket fort in the living room and ate straight from the boxes. She fell asleep halfway through the movie with her head on my shoulder and pizza sauce on her pajamas, and I carried her to bed feeling like maybe we could finally have normal nights again without checking the locks every 5 minutes. 3 days later, I was washing dishes when movement outside caught my eye, and there was Brian's car creeping down our street at maybe 5 miles per hour, with him staring right at our apartment windows. I grabbed my phone and recorded through the kitchen window, getting clear footage of his license plate and his face turned toward our building while he drove past twice more before finally leaving. The timestamp on the video showed 7:43 p.m., and I immediately called 911 to report the violation, while pulling up the other camera footage from our doorbell that showed the same car passing by from a different angle. The dispatcher said units were already looking for Brian because of the restraining order in the system. And within 2 hours, Detective Guthrie called to say they'd arrested him at his apartment, where he was drunk and crying about just wanting to see if we were okay. Brian spent that night in jail, and Guthrie explained that violating a restraining order was automatic arrest, with no warnings or second chances, and the judge would probably add jail time for breaking the order so fast. That weekend, Alina and I went to the park for the first time without me constantly scanning the parking lot, and she actually played on the swings while I sat on a bench reading a book instead of watching every person who walked by. We got ice cream from the truck and fed ducks at the pond, and nobody followed us home or left weird messages or made me feel like I needed to look over my shoulder every 30 seconds. Monday morning, Sienna called to explain that Brian's violation actually helped our case because it proved he couldn't follow court orders, and the prosecutor was pushing for the maximum sentence of 6 months plus mandatory counseling and alcohol treatment. She said the judge was not happy that Brian violated the order within 72 hours and would probably give him real jail time to protect us and teach him that restraining orders had teeth. Anastasia had us come in for a special art therapy session, where Alina painted pictures while talking about feeling safer now that Brian was locked up and couldn't surprise us anymore. The pictures she drew had fewer black walls and more colorful flowers, and when Anastasia asked her to draw our family, she put us in a house with big windows instead of the fortress she'd been drawing for weeks. My sister texted asking if we could meet at a coffee shop to talk about everything that happened and how sorry she was for telling Brian about the play without thinking about our safety. I agreed to meet her once a month with clear rules about never sharing any information about our schedule or location with anyone, and she promised to respect every boundary I set. 2 weeks after his arrest, Brian stood in orange jail clothes, while the judge sentenced him to 90 days in county jail, plus 2 years probation with required alcohol counseling and stalking behavior therapy. The judge said violating the restraining order showed complete disregard for the court and our safety, so Brian needed real consequences to understand this wasn't a game or negotiation. Brian's lawyer tried to argue for time served, but the judge cut him off, saying 3 days in jail wasn't enough for terrorizing a child, and her mother after being explicitly ordered to stay away. When they led Brian out in handcuffs, he looked smaller somehow, and I realized I wasn't scared of him anymore because the system was finally protecting us, instead of just documenting his behavior. River Kavanaugh called to say the school was holding a special assembly about personal safety and recognizing unsafe situations inspired by our experience, though they wouldn't mention us specifically. Alina felt proud that other kids might learn to speak up if someone made them uncomfortable, and asked if she could help make posters about trusting your gut feelings when something felt wrong. The counselor said Alina was showing amazing resilience by wanting to help others, and this was a healthy way to process her experience into something positive. 3 months felt like enough time to actually relax and stop jumping every time a car door slammed or someone knocked on our door without calling first. My therapist's office had those ugly brown chairs that made weird noises when you shifted, but I sat there every Tuesday morning trying to figure out why I still checked locks 5 times, even with Brian behind bars. She had me write down every time I felt scared during the week, and the list covered 3 pages until she pointed out that half of them were just normal sounds that any house makes at night. We worked on breathing exercises that felt stupid at first, but actually helped when I caught myself staring at the doorbell camera for 20 minutes straight. Alina came home from the school one afternoon and asked if we could throw a party for her play, since the real celebration got ruined by Brian showing up. I called 3 of her friends' moms and organized a small gathering at our apartment with a cake shaped like theater masks, and everyone wearing costume pieces from their dress-up bins. She performed her big monologue again in our living room while her friends cheered and threw confetti we'd be finding for weeks. The prosecutor called to tell me Brian was getting released after his 90 days, but going straight to a treatment facility for 6 months as part of his probation deal. Sienna said she'd monitor everything through the court system and make sure he stayed compliant with all the requirements, including the no-contact order. Detective Guthrie stopped by to officially close our active case file, but left his direct number and promised they'd respond fast if Brian tried anything. He said most stalkers gave up after real jail time, but to stay careful anyway since Brian had shown such obsessive behavior before. I noticed Alina stopped keeping her backpack by her bed and actually unpacked it completely for the first time since the whole mess started. She even asked if we could paint her room a new color for summer, which meant she was thinking about the future instead of being ready to run. My sister started picking up groceries for us every Sunday, and dropping Alina at dance class on Wednesdays without me having to ask. She never pushed for more than I offered and always texted before coming over instead of just showing up like she used to. A thick envelope arrived from Brian's treatment facility with his therapist's letterhead, but I didn't even open it before filing it in the folder with all the other legal documents. Sienna said I had no obligation to read anything from his treatment team, and maintaining no contact was the healthiest choice. The school held their end-of-year awards ceremony in the same auditorium where Brian had grabbed me, but this time I watched Alina walk across that stage to get her Art Achievement Award without scanning for threats. She held up her certificate and smiled so big while I took pictures from the same spot where everything went crazy months ago. One morning I realized I'd gone 2 whole weeks without checking the doorbell camera first thing when I woke up. The safety stuff was still there, but it felt like wearing a seatbelt instead of armor now. Alina found me organizing her school papers and asked the question I'd been dreading since Brian showed up at her play. "Is that man ever going to be my dad?" she asked while coloring at the kitchen table. I sat down next to her and told her no. She already had all the family she needed right here with me. She nodded and went back to her drawing, adding flowers around the edges. "Good. I like it better with just us," she said without looking up. My chest got tight, but in a good way this time. 6 months passed, and I found us a new place across town with better schools and a small yard where Alina could paint outside. The moving truck pulled up on a Saturday morning, and my sister showed up with coffee and donuts even though I hadn't asked her to come. She grabbed boxes without saying much, and when Alina's hair kept falling in her face while carrying her art supplies, my sister pulled out a hair tie and asked if she could help. Alina stood still while my sister braided her hair the same way she used to braid mine when we were kids, and I watched them from the doorway pretending to check my phone. We unpacked everything that weekend, and Alina picked the bedroom with the window facing the backyard where she could watch birds while drawing. Detective Guthrie called Tuesday afternoon while I was hanging pictures to tell me Brian finished his 6-month treatment program without any incidents or attempts to contact us. He said the court would keep monitoring, but Brian seemed to finally understand the boundaries and was living with his parents in another state now. I thanked him and filed the paperwork with all the other legal stuff I hoped to never look at again. Alina spent the next few weeks planting flowers in our new garden, getting dirt under her fingernails and paint on her jeans while creating what she called our rainbow corner. She hung wind chimes from the fence and painted rocks with inspirational words she found online, turning our little yard into something that felt completely ours. The adoption caseworker came for her final visit in July and sat at our kitchen table watching Alina show off her latest paintings while I made lemonade. She wrote in her report that we'd handled the crisis better than most families, and our bond was stronger because we'd protected each other through it. After she left, Alina asked if that meant no more check-ins, and when I said yes, she did a little victory dance around the living room. Her new school had tryouts for their fall talent show, and she practiced her song every night after dinner, using the hairbrush as a microphone while I sat on the couch being her audience. The night of the show, I sat in the third row watching her walk onto that stage with total confidence. No fear in her eyes, just pure excitement about performing. She hit every note, and when she took her bow, I clapped so hard my hands hurt and didn't once look over my shoulder or check the exits. A whole year went by, and suddenly we were arguing about whether she had to eat vegetables before dessert and why homework had to come before TV time. Brian's name stopped coming up in therapy, and then we stopped needing therapy at all because our problems were normal kid stuff now. Saturday mornings became our sacred time again, with Alina learning to flip pancakes without dropping them while telling me about her week at the school. She'd gotten taller and her hair was longer, and she'd stopped keeping that backpack by her bed months ago. This particular Saturday, she was mixing chocolate chips into the batter, even though I said plain was healthier, and she looked at me with those eyes that weren't scared anymore. "Mom, can Sarah come over after dance class today?" she asked while pouring too much syrup on her stack, and I said yes because that's what normal families do. They have friends over and make messes and live their lives without looking backward. That's how it unfolded for me. Now I want to know what you think. Drop a comment and let's talk about it.